The greatest heroes ever foretold.
I'll have you know there already is a Russian X-Man. His name is Colossus.
Well, that Colossus had, this is a major digression, but my favorite thing in 70s X-Men, when just like everyone was on the shittiest coke and weed of all time, just like dirt weed and like bright yellow coke. There was a storyline where the Doctor Strange takes the X-Men to hell, and Colossus is there, and he's like, "Well, look at that! Look how bad this is. If you fuck up once, you're tortured forever. This is why I'm glad I'm an atheist." It's like, but you're like seeing hell. Like, man, they did awesome shit back then.
He goes, all told, I met with Yeltsin 18 times and Putin 5 times. Twice when he was Yeltsin's prime minister, and 3 times in the 10-plus months that our terms as president overlapped. That's just 3 short of all the U.S.-USSR leaders' meetings from 1943 through 1991. The idea that we ignored, disrespected, or tried to isolate Russia is false. Yes, NATO expanded despite Russia's objections, but expansion was about more than the U.S. relationship with Russia. When my administration started in 1993, no one felt certain that a post-Cold War Europe would remain peaceful, stable, and democratic. Big questions remained about East Germany's integration with West Germany, whether old conflicts would explode across the continent as they did in the Balkans, and how former Warsaw Pact nations and newly independent Soviet republics would seek security, not just against the threat of Russian invasion, but from one another and from conflicts within their borders. The possibility of EU and NATO membership provided the greatest incentives for Central and Eastern European states to invest in political and economic reforms and abandon a go-it-alone strategy of militarization. Neither the EU nor NATO could stay within the borders Stalin had imposed in 1945. Many countries that had been behind the Iron Curtain were seeking greater freedom and prosperity and security with the EU and NATO. Under inspiring leaders such as Václav Havel in the Czech Republic, Lech Walesa in Poland, and yes, a young pro-democracy Viktor Orban in Hungary, thousands of everyday citizens crowded the streets of Prague, Warsaw, Budapest, Bucharest, Sofia, and beyond whenever I spoke there. He's like, he's just bragging about the crowds he got in Hungary. As Carl Bildt, the former Swedish prime minister and foreign minister, tweeted in December 2021, it wasn't NATO seeking to go east. It was former Soviet satellites and republics wishing to go west. I mean, like that. That's their.
I mean, yeah. I don't know why people call NATO an extortion racket. It is, yeah. I wonder if they looked east and were like, "Oh my God, holy shit, we need to get on our knees."
And it's like, despite it being their wish to go west, it's like America is the West, and we get to decide who's in and out of the club. So
yeah, like what are we gonna do? These poor little Eastern European countries.
They wanted to join.
What were we gonna do? Say no? Like when the Soviets asked in the 50s? No.
But Poland could never be a made guy because his mom was a bunch of Turks and Mongols, and his dad was a regular white person. So they could be good earners, but the second they go into a country that uses normal letters, they're put on a chain gang and forced to clean toilets. But they get to be in NATO.
Enlarging NATO required unanimous consent of the alliance's then 16 members, 2/3 consent of a sometimes skeptical U.S. Senate, close consultation with prospective members to ensure that their military, economic, and political reforms met NATO's high standards, and near constant reassurance to Russia. Madeleine Albright excelled at every step. Indeed, few diplomats have ever been so perfectly suited for the times they served as Madeleine. As a child in war-torn Europe, Madeleine and her family were twice forced to flee their home, first by Hitler, then by Stalin. She understood that the end of the Cold War provided the chance to build Europe a free, united, and prosperous to build a Europe free, united, prosperous, and secure for the first time since nation-states arose on the continent. As UN Ambassador and Secretary of State, she worked to realize that vision and to beat back the religious, ethnic, and other tribal divisions that threatened it. What was that when she yelled, Serb pigs, don't touch me? What was that when she screamed at Serbian people at a press conference or something?
Yeah, she said, yeah, dirty Serbs, get out.
Dirty Serbs, yeah.
Yeah, I want to go back a little bit to the high standards of NATO. As we like to say, that is certainly one way to put it.
Like what are the high standards here? They're like to join NATO.
The SIG high standards of NATO. Like, Jesus fucking Christ. I as we have said, I think it's like incredibly unfair and ugly to seriously say that the average Ukrainian is a Nazi. even though there is a problem with like Nazi armed groups in the country, to say that average Ukrainians are Nazis is ridiculous. It's wrong. In the worst case, if it has any institutional or national power behind that sentiment, it makes those Nazi groups more powerful. This is absolutely fair to say about Lithuania, though, which is a NATO state. This is 100% fair to say about the nation of Lithuania. I'm sorry.
The result has been more than 2 decades of peace and prosperity for an ever larger portion of Europe and a strengthening of our collective security. Per capita GDPs have more than tripled in the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland. All 3 countries have participated in a variety of NATO missions since joining, including the peacekeeping force in Kosovo. To date, no member state of our defensive alliance has been invaded. Indeed, even in the early years after the fall of the Iron Curtain, the mere prospect of NATO membership helped cool long-simmering disputes between Poland, Lithuania, Hungary, and Romania, and others. Now, Russia's unprovoked and unjustified invasion of Ukraine, far from casting the wisdom of NATO expansion into doubt, proves that this policy was necessary. Russia under Putin clearly would not have been a content status quo power in the absence of expansion. It wasn't an immediate likelihood of Ukraine joining NATO that led Putin to invade Ukraine twice, in 2004 and in February, but rather the country's shift toward democracy that threatened his autocratic power at home, and a desire to control the valuable assets beneath Ukrainian soil. And it is the strength of the NATO alliance and its credible threat of defensive force that has prevented Putin from menacing members from the Baltics to Eastern Europe. As The Atlantic's Ann Applebaum said recently,
oh, hell yeah, bring it.
The expansion of NATO was the most successful, if not the only truly successful piece of American foreign policy of the last 30 years. We would be having this fight in East Germany right now if we hadn't done it. So it's, I like that Ann Applebaum is saying that the expansion of NATO is the only successful Western foreign policy initiative of the last 30 years, most of which she was also the author of. So she's like, I'm still banking on this.
The intentions were good, okay? That's what we need to know. Even if everything goes wrong, it's not, and even though we are the most powerful country on earth and presumably have some sort of say on the outcome, it's never our fault.
Well, I mean, this is why people are sort of twisting themselves into knots with this kind of absurd position that the weaker than in any time in the last 150, 200 years, the Western left caused the invasion of Ukraine somehow through posts and blogs. You kind of have to say that because otherwise it sort of rings bare that anything happening in Ukraine, absolutely the onus is on Russia, but it's also an immense failure of a policy of provocation and expansion. So you have to say just this insane shit that accounts with 30,000 followers emboldened Putin to act.
The failure of Russian democracy and its turn to revanchism was not catalyzed in Brussels at NATO headquarters. It was decided in Moscow by Putin. He could have used Russia's prodigious skills in information technology to create a competitor for Silicon Valley and build a strong, diversified.
I'm sure we
economy.
we would have welcomed that, certainly. A competitor for Silicon Valley? Absolutely. We love it. America, we love a little global competition over IP. Oh my God. It's our favorite thing.
What the
he could have
fuck
cultivated...
are we talking about? Like, if Russia built something similar to the iPhone, they would have flattened St. Petersburg. Jesus fucking Christ! Fucking Steve Jobs, they would have grafted his head onto a mech and fucking launched suitcase nukes all over the fucking country. What are you talking about? Jesus Christ!
Wait.
I know he's a former president. They have to run it, but this is insane. This is just print the goatsy guy. What the fuck is this?
Wait, I mean, look, they could have invested. I mean, what they did do was invest in all their oil and the sort of natural resources and building up their gigantic military. But what if they used all of those creative, productive forces to create a competitor with the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency? What? It's like they could have had peace and prosperity